Aloha kako and talofa. My name is Yaneta Le'i from Wailua, Hawaii, and I'm part of the Sundance Institute Indigenous Program. For over 40 years, Utah has been home to the Sundance Film Festival, and I'd like to acknowledge the Ute tribal nation, the ancestral keepers of the land that Sundance calls home. I would also like to honor the indigenous lands and people from which you join us, from our cold weather cousins in Sapmi lands to the Kanaka Maoli banded together atop Mauna Kea, Hawaii. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy our reimagined 2021 Sundance Film Festival.
Hi, I'm John Nine. I am one of the senior programmers here at Sundance, and I want to welcome you to what has become an annual event here at the festival, a conversation about the intersection of science and film. I think it's surprising to some people that this ends up being one of the most energetic, fun, and fascinating conversations of the festival every year. It's always full of discoveries about science and storytelling. And this is something we present each year in partnership with the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, whose support of Sundance not only includes a prize that we give each year to a film in the festival that explores scientific themes and characters and their place in our culture. And this year, that prize went to Son of Monarchs, but also extends to supporting emerging filmmakers in our feature film program. So, to say a few words about the work of the foundation, I want to bring up, virtually speaking, Doran Weber, who is the Vice President of Programs.
Hi, everyone. My name is Doran Weber. I'm the Vice President and Program Director at the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 Sundance Film Festival. This is our 18th year, the Sloan Foundation, of supporting Sundance, and it's my first year of not coming to Park City. We're all here virtually, so it's the movies, and we're going to pretend. It's a pleasure to see all of you. A word about the Sloan Foundation before we head to our wonderful panel. We are a nonprofit philanthropy founded in 1934, and we make grants for research and education in science, technology, and economics. Our program in public understanding of science and technology supports an array of media, books, radio, films, theater, television, and new media, all aimed at bridging the gap between the two cultures of science and the arts. Our film program is now also almost 2 decades old, and we have supported a dozen film schools with annual awards in screenwriting and film production. And we have 6 wonderful screenwriting and film festival partners in addition to Sundance. And we have supported 30 feature films that have come out of the program. Last year at Sundance, we had 2 films, Tesla with Ethan Hawke in the title role, and Coded Bias, about the automated decision-making and the bias that is encoded in those computers. And this year we have half a dozen new screenplay awards that we're giving out at Sundance at our other partners. Again, we're delighted to welcome you here, and we look forward to a great panel. Thank you.
So we have an incredible conversation in store for you. One of the guiding principles of the festival this year, the first under our new festival director, Tabitha Jackson, was a metaphor that actually comes courtesy of science. That the first image of a black hole was achieved through a global network of synchronized radio observatories, or that an array of telescopes in the Atacama Desert can actually see further than anyone alone. These allow us to think about how multiple perspectives reveal truths. And that was really the starting point for our conversation. We have a great group of people on hand for that. On the filmmaker storytelling side, Scott Burns, who amongst many screenplays, The Bourne Ultimatum, The Informant, Side Effects, also wrote Contagion, which speaks to this year in a way that no other film has. He's directed a number of films, including The Report, which played here at Sundance, and is now working on a series for Apple TV called Extrapolations about climate change. He also produced An Inconvenient Truth and Sea of Shadows. Kath Lingenfelter's screenwriting credits include Westworld, Caprica, The Leftovers, and House, MD. She is passionate about science and has a number of other projects she's working on. And she's frequently collaborated with the Science and Entertainment Exchange, a division of the National Academy of Sciences. She's appeared on panels and given keynotes on the challenges and benefits of demanding credible science in entertainment. On the science side, honored to welcome Dr. Galit Alter, who is a professor of medicine at MIT, Harvard, and the Ragon Institute of MGH. She is also the co-director of Harvard University Center for AIDS Research. She works on immune responses to a number of infectious diseases and on developing therapeutics to cure and control those diseases. Engineer and retired NASA astronaut Leland Melvin has traveled off planet twice on the space shuttle Atlantis to help build the International Space Station. He then led NASA's education programs and co-chaired the White House's Federal Coordination in STEM Education Task Force. And leading the conversation is Jana Levin. She is a professor of physics and astronomy at Barnard College, director of sciences at Pioneer Works, which is a cultural center in Brooklyn, and is also the author of A Madman Dreams of Turing Machines and Black Hole Survivor Guide. She's an amazing science communicator. She's been a guest here at Sundance before, and I'm delighted to have her back to moderate. So I will give it over to Jana.
The concept of coming together for big science collaboration as a topic for Sundance was sparked in part by a conversation at the Cultural Center in Brooklyn called Pioneer Works. I was in conversation with the director of the Event Horizon Telescope, which you may have heard of as a project requiring an instrument the size of the entire Earth. And here's an example where a worldwide international collaboration is required among observatories and scientists to create an effective global telescope that went on to capture a single image of a black hole over 6 billion times the mass of the sun in a neighboring galaxy 55 million light years away. And that spirit of collaboration, sometimes it fails when egos get in the way or politics, but mostly science succeeds due to extremely generous instincts in which all the participants throw down for a greater cause. Can we pull out the image of the black hole? It's remarkable to think that over 1 billion people came together to gawk, really in awe, at the first ever human-procured image of a black hole. We'll talk today about other collaborations that require this coming together, including the International Space Station, the possibly ill-fated ambition to build true artificial intelligence, nuclear energy and its attendant dangers, as well as our ability to adapt to climate change. Now, our speakers we're lucky to have are also able to talk about the remarkable campaign that we have all watched with anxiety and anticipation to develop COVID vaccines and fight this global pandemic that's, pushed us into this virtual exile where I'm now speaking to my wonderful guests. So let me give a really quick introduction to our scientists and filmmakers. Joining us is screenwriter, director, and producer Scott Z. Burns, whose interest in science is reflected in films like An Inconvenient Truth and The Prescient Contagion. I'm very honored to have Dr. Galit Alter, who's one of the leaders of a new initiative to develop a single-dose vaccine against COVID-19. So that's going to be very interesting. We're really glad to have Kath Lingenfelter, who's an accomplished screenwriter with credits including the critically acclaimed Westworld. And she has a great interest in representing really credible science and entertainment. So what a great group of people. Also is my friend, astronaut Leland Melvin, who began his career in the NFL before joining NASA. Leland has traveled off-planet twice on Space Shuttle Atlantis to help build the International Space Station. So, no big deal. So I'm thrilled to have this group of people here. Leland, let's start with you. One of the things that amazes me when I think about your experiences is imagining that moment when you board the Space Shuttle Atlantis and they close the door and you're going to take off. Now, of course, there had been disasters for the space shuttle. And so where do you find the fortitude to have this trust in this enormous, again, collaboration, this big team across NASA?
Oh, Jana, it's so great to be here with this incredible panel. And I think when you're sitting in the rocket, about to take off, you think about the things and the people that you've worked with and interacted with. And one of the things that I thought about was David Brown's father, who I went to console the night that we lost the Space Shuttle Columbia. And his father said to me with tears in his eyes, he said, "Leland, my son is gone. There's nothing we can do to bring him back, but the biggest tragedy would be if we don't continue to fly to honor their legacy. He's already talking about the legacy of the crew and his son. And while I'm sitting there, I have a picture of the crew, and I'm thinking I have to be perfect to honor that legacy. And so I wasn't afraid. I had a task to do from his father. And 321 left off. We get to space safely. We work. We live. We thrive as a group of people from all around the planet, working and living together as one family off planet to build this international outpost. And it was the most incredible moment that I've ever had in my life.
Now, this idea, you talked about the international community on the ISS, and that really is remarkable. Do you get to know the other astronauts before you go up? Or are you just kind of flung together and you all have to kind of culturally and politically adapt to each other?
Well, I've trained in Russia, I've trained in Japan and Germany and all of these places where our international partners exist, and we get to know each other, we get to meet our families, and it's and then but you might not have seen these people for maybe 8 months or a year at a time before you get to the space station. So once you get there, you come through the hatch and you're like, "Hey, Sergey, I haven't seen you, man. Where you been?" And you start hugging and high fiving and doing flips and but the biggest moment that we have that's incredible is when we all float around the table that was built by the first crew, the Expedition 1 crew, and we break bread at 17,500 miles per hour, going around the planet every 90 minutes, seeing a sunrise and a sunset every 45. And this was while listening to Sade Smooth Operator, smooth operator, and we're eating food, and we're hanging out.
Right.
And this is when my perspective changed on how I can interact better with humanity when I get back home.
So it's a perfect time. Can we show your clip, Leland? This is a clip of real-time footage. So we don't have to ask how the special effects were imposed. It's a beautiful thing. You were talking about going so fast, right? You're going 17,500 miles an hour. You're actually falling all the time. That's why you're floating.
Definitely.
It's such a beautiful demonstration of this idea. So can we show that clip? And Leland, will you tell us about it while we're watching?
Yeah, on my second mission, I was in charge of robotics, so we were installing these spare parts on the International Space Station. These logistic carriers that had pump package assemblies and spare robotic arm parts, and we're using the robotic arm to put these last components up because we're about to retire the space shuttle, and we won't have the heavy lift capability to add the components to build the space station. So you see the Canadian Arm 2 driving in to grapple this piece, and now we're playing football in space. I take the hit.
Yeah, you got
we do
hit.
stupid
You looked like you
tricks.
took a hit there.
But you just keep floating in space, Jana, and it doesn't really hurt. And then transferring bags with your feet, moving these components and things to install them on the space station. But I think the most incredible moments are when, like I said, we break bread and we work together as a family, as a team, talking about our families, having crab and rehydrated turkey for Thanksgiving and stuffing, and we have Russian, German, French, African American, Asian American, all working together as one family, breaking bread. And there's Randy floating food to his mouth, and Scorch and Mike saying, good. And the last transfer item that we had was Nicole Stott. She had been in space for 3 months, and we brought her back home to her family safely. So, there's these really important moments of reconnecting families and people doing stupid astronaut tricks with M&Ms and water bubbles. That's physics, that's surface tension, that's chemistry, all these things that we can do and play that help inspire that next generation. Coming home, the G's are starting to build back up on you. I think about 2.5 G's are starting to, your arms are feeling heavy. You're doing these S turns to bleed off all the energy as you come back and to Florida, and you see the heads-up display. We have one shot to do this. We have no more fuel left, so we've got to get it right the first time. And we nailed it. We got home and saw our families, and just an incredible moment in space.
Amazing. You've described, it really is amazing. I no matter how much I talk to you, I will never really grasp what that experience must be like to be out in space, both terrifying and beautiful. You've described the space station as the most complex thing we have ever put together. And that is even it was built in space.
Yeah, there were no fit checks on the ground. I mean, you launched things
Right.
from Kazakhstan, you launched things from all over, and they had to work in space, And I think that's a testament to humanity's ingenuity to be able to work together across borders, across
Yeah.
languages, and make
Yeah.
things work that are science, And it's about
Yeah.
science. It's all about science. But it paled in comparison after installed this $2 billion Columbus laboratory, the thing that's on the right side of the picture behind me, because I thought that would be my aha moment. But when
Huh.
we broke bread, when we came together as a family, is really what it's all about, the people, not all the technological things, but the people working together as one family.
Yeah, we forget people have done all of these things, right? It took human ingenuity to do it. You've also likened this building of the space station to addressing something like the worldwide pandemic. And at this point, I want to ask Scott about his, I already called it prescient, but this film, Contagion, which was very terrifying. And so what brought you to that subject at that time, this concept of a worldwide pandemic? I mean, I know it's often in fiction, but it just seemed to be so on the nose.
Well, first of all, as a screenwriter, you never really get to say the sentence when you're sitting in the rocket waiting for it to take off. So I just want to go back to that for a minute. That's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing that.
One day, Scott, one day.
I hope so. Interestingly, my father worked on the space program. He worked for Honeywell and he worked for NASA many years ago. And one of the things that my father and I talked about towards the end of his life quite a bit, and this was in the aughts, was that eventually a virus would jump from the animal kingdom into humanity, as it has done throughout history. And my father would read the paper and sort of track bird flu. And we would talk about this. And Steven Soderbergh and I had just finished a film called The Informant. And we were heading home. And he said, "What do you want to do next?" And I said, "Well, I've always been really interested in doing a kind of a global pandemic movie that was grounded in science." And he said, "I love it. Let's do it." And I started doing research. The first person I met was a really fascinating epidemiologist named Dr. Larry Brilliant, who is credited as part of the team that eradicated smallpox from India. So I went and I met with Dr. Brilliant, and he introduced me to a lot of other people.
What a name.
Yeah. He deserved it. Wish I had been named something like that. I probably could have lived up to it, or at least tried. But Larry introduced me to a lot of remarkable experts. Many of them people are probably familiar with now because they're the people who you see on the news every night talking about the pandemic that we're all living through. People like Ian Lipkin, people like Laurie Garrett, Anthony Fauci. And all of them said to me after they taught me a lot of things that I needed to do to write the script, they all said the same thing, which is it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and that our relationship with the planet is filled with encounters with viruses, and that we're going to have sadly more after this one. And it's a remarkable story, as Dr. Alter can tell you, of how our immune system, figures these things out over time and how our species continues. But I was really interested in telling a story about how these things, are able to proliferate in a world that now is more globalized than ever before. It used to be that a virus would move from village to village only as fast as we could walk. Now a virus can get on a plane in Wuhan and be in Seattle and in Italy and in Germany and in a lot of other places, and if that virus happens to have a very, any sort of period where it's asymptomatic, it becomes really difficult. So those were things that I knew about. Obviously, there were things I couldn't possibly have encountered, like the colossal failure of our federal government to protect the population. When I was doing my research on this, and I went to the CDC in 2010, the commitment there was extraordinary on the part of the scientists and the epidemiologists and the public health people who go out into the field. And it's been really painful for me knowing how hard those people work to keep us safe, to see the incredible betrayal of science that we've all just lived through for the last 4 years.
Yeah, it is remarkable. I knew some of the virologists who were advising you on that film, actually. And so they were telling me in secret, because I believe there was some kind of shroud of don't disclose the details of this film. But I knew what they did, which was forecasting diseases that were crossing the species barrier in wet markets, which is spot on kind of the situation that we're describing now. I'd love it if you would introduce the clip you selected from Contagion, and also tell us a little bit why this particular clip from the film.
Yeah, well, one of the things that Dr. Brilliant and the other people taught me about, very early on was that every virus has a thing called an R naught, and that's a way scientifically of describing its ability to spread. And R naughts are in a sense complicated things to sort out because it's about the transmissibility of the virus, and if it's aerosolized, and if it, can engage in what they call fomite spread, which would involve surfaces, and a host of other things that Dr. Alter is probably much better at explaining than I am. But there's also a thing called the population of susceptibles, and so that also becomes a variable that you have to figure out. And I felt it was important really early on in the movie to make it clear to the audience that this was a really important thing to figure out if you're, in the public health world, because obviously how transmissible a given virus is really dictates the curbs on human behaviors and the guardrails we have to put up very, very quickly to try and stop it. And unfortunately, our country completely failed to do that. And that's why we are where we are. So it was interesting because the studio sort of pushed back on this scene as being too science-y. And then after we had cast Kate Winslet, she read it and was like, okay, I can't do this because I don't understand it. So I spent a day and a half teaching Kate public health, which she did an amazing job with. So anyway, it became a really important part of the movie, I think, to all of us. And now looking back, I hope this is a scene that when people watch it, they understand how important it is to understanding the kind of crisis that we're going through.
We have 47 cases and 8 deaths as of 5 this afternoon. It's a weekend. These numbers might be low. People are staying home for a couple of days, see if they get any better.
So at this point, I think we have to believe this is respiratory. Maybe fomites, too.
What's that, fomites?
It refers to transmission from surfaces. The average person touches their face 2,000 or 3,000 times a day.
2,000 or 3,000 times a day?
3 to 5 times every waking minute. In between, we're touching doorknobs, water fountains, elevator buttons, and each other. Those things become fomites.
Is this something we want to release to the press, respiratory and fomite?
And how's the public going to react to that?
It's hard to say. Plastic shark in a movie will keep people from getting in the ocean, but a warning on the side of a pack of cigarettes...
We're going to need to walk the governor through this before we start to freak everybody out. I mean, we can't even tell people right now what they should be afraid of. We tried that with swine flu, and all we did was get healthy people scared. It's the biggest shopping weekend of the year.
I think we need to consider closing the schools down.
And who stays home with the kids? People that work at stores, government workers, people that work at hospitals. When will we know what this is? What causes it? What cures it? Things that keep people calm.
What we need to determine is this. For every person who gets sick, how many other people are they likely to infect? So For seasonal flu, that's usually about 1. Smallpox, on the other hand, it's over 3. Now, before we had a vaccine, polio spread at a rate between 4 and 6. Now, we call that number the R naught. R stands for the reproductive rate of the virus.
Any ideas what that might be for this?
How fast it multiplies depends on a variety of factors. The incubation period, how long a person is contagious. Sometimes people can be contagious without even having symptoms. We need to know that too. And we need to know how big the population of people susceptible to the virus might be.
So that's really, we've all taken a crash course in all of those things you just described. And not just a crash course, we're all kind of now in an extended lesson on exactly these things. Now, in general, you've described your interest, and I believe that this is your phrase, extrapolating stories from facts. And that's a competition between, that was a very sciencey scene, but it really works. It's very effective. You're engaged. You never lose your interest. You never wander away. And so how hard is that tension to extrapolate a story from facts?
Well, as Catherine, I'm sure will tell you the same thing. The trick of, I guess, what we call speculative fiction now is working with science and working with scientists and understanding what's possible. And there's drama in that all the time. I mean, Leland just described both what is the human aspect of being in space, in the space station, but also the amazing technological part of it. And, ultimately you want to ground these stories in the human experience. I mean, I'm sitting here in New York right now, working on some public service announcements to try and overcome vaccine hesitancy. Because again, we're in this interesting space where the science is very persuasive that these vaccines are effective. I mean, they've done the tests, and a lot of people think that these vaccines were rushed. But again, as Dr. Alter can tell you, SARS-CoV-2 was something that we were aware of 20 years ago.
It's a perfect time to ask Galit about this, because you are one of is it very few people? I don't even really know how many teams in the world that is working on a unique vaccine. I know that you were working with Elon Musk on SpaceX to look for antibodies in astronauts, which is a beautiful connection with Leland's experience. And now Elon Musk has donated $5 million to you and your collaborators to pursue this vaccine. And so it must be very exciting, but very scary. So I'd love to hear about that project and that program.
Thanks so much. So I have to first thank Scott for writing that movie, because I think that was an incredibly important educational exercise for the public. And I think that
I was going to ask you if you saw it when it came out.
I loved it. I want to photograph. No, I love Contagion, and I also love Westworld, one of my favorite shows. But anyways, and Leland, I do wonder if I've tested your antibodies. I guess the point is I think there are hundreds of vaccines in current development for SARS-CoV-2. There is not just one. There are not just 2 that have been approved, but there are hundreds coming in the pipeline. And I think the essence to understand from this exercise is that this is probably the first time in history that so many scientists have come together at one single time to fight a single pathogen. I mean, that is the most incredible experience that we as scientists and physicians and medical practitioners have experienced, is this call to arms. And more importantly, this call to arms as a collective to save the planet, and hopefully those off the planet as well. Part of that battle, right, is bringing to bear the most incredible science and technology and creativity we can bring to bear on trying to kill this pathogen as fast as possible. But the one thing to remember is at every single step, we have brought safety and the quality of testing to the forefront, and that is the number one priority on all of our minds. We're thinking about all the different ways we can use our immune system to engineer it, to fight this pathogen, and to make sure that we can not only fight this pathogen, but many pathogens in the future that are like SARS-CoV-2. So really trying to think, how we can expand this incredible knowledge that we've all been able to share and bring together over the last few months to begin to, prevent many, many other diseases in the future. But I think that the one thing that is really important, and I'm so appreciative, Scott, that you're on this campaign trail to make sure that individuals understand that every single step of the process of developing these vaccines, testing these vaccines, and licensing this vaccine has had safety as a number one metric that we have been watching.
Can you give us an impression of how the world of in your field managed to do this so quickly, given that the last vaccine that was rushed was like a 4-year project? How did you get this? How did this happen that internationally we were able to do this so quickly?
Sharing of knowledge, right? That is the number one, material asset that we were able to share faster than we've ever been able to share before. It's not that we didn't have the internet or Zoom or Google Chat beforehand, but it was never this feeling of urgency that really came over this entire community and essentially motivated all of us to start sharing knowledge in real time. And what that means is the minute, even like the second that we had some clue about the sequence of the virus, the immune responses that were protective, the populations that were most susceptible or vulnerable, that data was shared in real time. And I think that what is incredible is you think that there are scientists in every single country, in every single city all around this world. There are folks who are thinking about pathogens and viruses all the time. We are not alone, the ones that you're seeing on the news or you're seeing in the media. There are folks thinking about viruses and how to create vaccines and really creative and important types of therapeutics to intervene with infections all across this globe. But it was really this ability to self-assemble, aggregate, collaborate, and begin to come up with ways that we can share material sequences, samples, as well as all the necessary ingredients to build those vaccines and understand the immune responses that they induce that change the landscape. And I think that what happened is, I think on the other side, the regulators, those people that are watching to make sure that every type of vaccine that we are developing in our laboratories or in our large companies are safe and effective, the regulators also began to come to the table and have a conversation. And that was really a moment in history, right? Where regulators and scientists, vaccine developers were able to begin to come up with strategies to essentially make the process more efficient. Nothing was cut out. We never lost any of the safety testing benchmarks. We never changed any of the entire process of licensure. We just essentially made the whole process efficient by understanding where it was that we could essentially bridge gaps and create shortened timelines. I think that the important point to make now is that we've changed vaccine development forever. It'll never take as long as it did before.
Amazing. And I really hope that message gets out there because obviously there's a history of anti-vaxxers, which is, I wonder how many of them are now willing to get the jab, but also that people understand exactly that safety was not compromised. A very recent former president of ours said the vaccine should only be for Americans. And I'd love to hear your reaction to that. I know we're all shaking our heads.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to say something, Scott?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the science is obviously a huge part of this, and what Dr. Alter just said is really important. I think it's vital that the media and that all of us as storytellers tell the amazing story of how this was open source and how quickly they were able to do this work. But that's only part of the problem. I mean, from the work that I'm doing here in New York, what I'm learning and what we all need to learn is that the other part of this problem is there are marginalized communities and communities that have been underserved and abused. And so it's not just the anti-vaxxers, it's people of color, it's people who are economically disadvantaged in our society who have been guinea pigs in the past. And we need to make it clear that this is different. And that's the work that really goes beyond the science. And it's this kind of moment where we need to merge the amazing science that we have with some really unfortunate history that we've all lived. So that's really where I feel like we're at right now.
Yeah, and Kath, I'm sorry it's taking me a while to get to you. I'm really excited to talk to you too. You do discuss the importance for the real world of appropriately representing science in film and television. And unlike Scott's films, which I think have a great deal of realism to the point of being harrowing at times, harrowing but engaging, your work strikes me as being more speculative. And so I'm interested in this balance of your respect and adherence to representing science and the tension with your love of this sort of imaginative speculation.
I think, first of all, Contagion was amazing and such a public service tool. I mean, when any of us logged on to Netflix in March or April, one of the most watched films at that time was Contagion. And it was such a valuable way of giving people a reference point. And I think that so much of what we do with story, we're connecting emotion to information, and we're using the benefits and tools of story as a vehicle to expose people to ideas and to create unexpected access points to ideas. And so even with speculative fiction, Brandon Sanderson has these rules of creating magic systems, and he's a science fiction fantasy novelist. And I think they hold true when you're also trying to use science in storytelling. And of utmost importance is you have to want your audience to understand the information in order to follow the story. A former boss of mine used to call it, what is the price of admission? And if people can understand basic, simple mechanics of what you're building, then they can get invested in the stakes and the emotion of the characters and follow the story. And you can't just make it up out of thin air and have nothing based in reality for people to be able to follow that story. And so grounding it in real science, in things that we understand, that we experience in our real world, it is the best tool that you can use when telling these stories. So, and then also going to a scientist, going to a consultant and saying, I need it to do this. Is that possible? And always in my experience with scientists, they're like, maybe, could be. And it's always a collaboration where there's no limit to the imagination. Like worrying that going and consulting with a scientist is only going to box you in is a fallacy. My experience has always been when I go and consult with a scientist, the story just grows, just expands. Like there's even greater possibilities. Hopefully that.
Well, there's one. Well, it's definitely, scientists love to speculate, right? And one of the aspects, for instance, about Westworld that I thought you captured in a really interesting way, about which scientists speculate, particularly people interested in AI, is this idea, even if we built a real genuine AI, the idea that we can embed them with our values when we don't even acknowledge that we don't have a set of values that we all agree upon. And you see this unfolding. It's such a arc in this long story of Westworld. And I don't know if you remember Tay, the millennial chatbot. Did you know about Tay? So Tay was launched on Twitter, was supposed to be a millennial chatbot, and in 16 hours had to be taken down because she became a genocidal Nazi-supporting racist. In the span of 16 hours. I actually asked Sundance if I could swear because I wanted to quote her profanities, what she said about women and the racism. It was like it had to come down. It was dead. And I sort of think about your characters taking longer to get there. Right, but becoming kind of genocidal. And I'm wondering how much of that trip you went on of just trying to imagine how wrong this could possibly go.
When you approach a topic, first of all, I was so lucky to be included in the project created by Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy. When you approach an idea as big as AI, there are many different ways to skin that cat. And I think for me, what I liked about the show, instead of the instead of leaning deeply into this idea of like AI is always going to end in disaster, we first explored it through a very human experience, which is, what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to be conscious? And part of that for us was building our own model for what we think consciousness is. And a lot of it is rooted in memory and nurture, as opposed to nature. One of the things we didn't get into that I think as much, which I think speaks to this topic that we're talking about today, which is collaboration, is this idea of, I think we've all heard the stories, seen the stories of like, AI is going to end in disaster. But what we don't talk about is, so how do we keep that from happening? It's unrealistic to say, just stop building AI.
Totally unrealistic.
Right. But what we don't necessarily, the conversation that we're not having that maybe we should be having is once somebody achieves, and right now there's an arms race going on in trying to achieve greater than human machine intelligence. Once somebody achieves that, that's not the time to start then figuring out what we're going to do. And it has global ramifications. That person, whoever that country or company is that achieves greater than human machine intelligence, will dominate, and there will be no opportunity. There's no hero that can come in and somehow succeed over that. It's done. So the conversation about it needs to be happening now, globally, collaboratively, of how do we handle, how do we approach creating true AI? Because it's happening, and I think we live in a culture of like, we'll deal with it when it happens, and this is not one of those cases where we can fix it in post. That's not going to happen.
Like the pandemic. And so, Kath, you actually chose a very different kind of a clip. So can you introduce this clip for us, why you chose it?
What I wanted to discuss is not just why science is great, but also how to use science, like the benefits of using science and how to use it as a storyteller, and that to attach it to emotion, to attach it to stakes, and also, the load that you expect the audience to carry in terms of the amount of information to go along in the journey that you're building. So what I love about this clip from Chernobyl, written by Craig Mazin, is it's a very tense moment for this character. We're in the former Soviet Union. There's been a nuclear meltdown at a reactor, but everybody's downplaying it because nobody wants to bring scrutiny or embarrassment to the Soviet Union. And so it's a table full of yes men. It's a very scary situation. Everybody knows, like, you don't go against the state. And Gorbachev's at the head, and he's been filled in, and everyone's like, it's going to be fine. And our hero character, a scientist, at great risk to his own safety and reputation, has to speak up. And when he does, I just have great respect for the way that the science is stepped out. And it's the first kind of building block for us as an audience to understand, what does it mean for a nuclear reactor to melt down?
I'm told it's the equivalent of a chest x-ray. So if you're overdue for a checkup...
And foreign press?
Totally unaware. KGB First Deputy Chairman Shirkov assures me that we have successfully protected our security interests.
Good. Very good. Well, it seems like it's well in hand, so... If there is nothing else, meeting adjourned. No. Pardon me?
We can't adjourn. This is Professor Legasov of the Kurchatov Institute. Professor, if you have any concerns, feel free to address them with me later.
I can't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Page 3, the section on casualties. A fireman was severely burned on his hand by a chunk of smooth black mineral on the ground outside the reactor building. Smooth black mineral. Graphite. There's graphite on the ground.
Well, there was a tank explosion. There's debris Of what importance that could
There's
be?
only one place in the entire facility where you will find graphite. Inside the core. If there's graphite on the ground outside, it means it wasn't a control system tank that exploded. It was the reactor core. It's open.
Comrade Sherbina.
Comrade General Secretary, I can assure you that Professor Legasov is mistaken. Brikhanov reports that the reactor core is intact. And as for the radiation...
Yes, 3.6 Röntgen, which, by the way, is not the equivalent of one chest X-ray, but rather 400 chest X-rays. That number's been bothering me for a different reason, though. It's also the maximum reading on low-limit dosimeters. They gave us the number they had. I think the true number is much, much higher. If I'm right, this fireman was holding the equivalent of 4 million chest X-rays in his hand.
Professor Legasov, there's no place for alarmist hysteria.
It's not alarmist if it's a fact.
Well, I don't hear any facts at all.
Wow.
It's chilling.
Yeah, I mean, it's so good because it's like, follow the graphite. The graphite, and people can understand X-rays and they can understand, okay, the graphite is bad. And then as they go, they just fill in more and more information. And by the end of the miniseries, you understand not only how a nuclear reactor works, but how it can go wrong. And it's all attached to story, character, and emotion. And I just thought it was a really excellent example of using science.
You know, I knew this would go too quickly. There were so many things I wanted to talk to all of you about, and I like indulged so much in each individual. But here we are. We're talking about nuclear meltdowns, shuttle disasters, a modern plague, climate change we barely touched upon, existential threat of AI, and yet you all seem to me to be very optimistic people. And so I kind of, you know, and Scott and Kath, your work can be really dark, but exciting and engaging, right? But it's dark at times. And I guess I wonder about that optimism. And, you know, your film, Contagion, there's still some optimism even in that film, right? And so where do we find optimism when we are enduring a plague and climate change and all of these things?
Well,
everybody, I don't know who.
The next project that I'm working on is a project at Apple called Extrapolations, which is a show that is a speculative fictional show that I've created about climate change that I'm working on with Dorothy Fortenberry from Handmaid's Tale. And, you know, the thing that we talk a lot about is hope and what is the function of hope. And to me, you know, hope without a plan, without a strategy, is a very dangerous thing. And so when I'm sitting in meetings with executives and they're like, but this is hopeful, right? What I say to them is people like Leland and like Dr. Alter, they give me hope because they are passionate and they are dignified and they're making a difference. And so to me, hope comes from characters who are behaving with integrity and dignity. Hope, you know, just as what is writ large from the science, no, climate change is happening. You know, just sitting around hoping about it won't make it go away. But there are things we really can do. But that isn't about hope, that's about action. And that's about the stories we tell each other and we tell ourselves about science and about what climate change really is.
Galit, clearly many people are arguing that the current plague can't be separated from climate change, and that we have to be thinking about how climate change encouraged a lot of the things we're seeing, wildfires and these things spiraling out of control. And do you believe that? Do you believe that climate change and maybe the next coronavirus pandemic or the next pandemic are connected?
Yeah, so there's no question that climate change and the emergence of pandemic or the increased frequency of pandemics that, zoonotic transmission of viruses from animals to humans is increasing in tandem. Whether or not it's directly related to changes in temperature or to the fact that, humans are spreading across the planet and they're infringing on the natural habitats of animals. And that increased interaction and that increase pushing back of these populations of animals that live happily with many of these pathogens in nature is likely the cause of why these viruses have an opportunity once in a while to try to mutate to enter the human population. So I think understanding the full package of how climate change, globalization, infringing on the environment, how all of these pieces come together and create these potential new plagues is really key to understanding how we can potentially prevent these in the future. Right. In the meantime, I think that focusing on one piece at a time is really essential, and providing the general population with some understanding of the small changes they can make. I have to say that these small these movies and these shows that help to educate the population through digestible sources of information, that is so important, because often scientists are not trained when we're doing our PhDs or MDs to communicate to the general population. We don't know how to explain an R naught. I could not have done it as well as Kate Winslet. That was brilliant. I mean, if you asked me to explain what an R naught was, I would give you an equation. So I think that having this information communicated to the public in a way that they can digest it and they can incorporate it, even if it makes them, think about creating less waste, that in itself might have an impact ultimately in the long run in the frequency of pandemics that might emerge. But what I would say is that in the process of thinking about climate change, we also have to understand how we can prevent and track these pathogens in nature, so we can also empower ourselves with tools to fight them should they emerge, if we're not fast enough in stopping the change in temperature across the globe.
Mm-hmm. And Kath, I mean, with your interest in science, I know offline that you were describing learning more about CRISPR and learning more about COVID. It's not necessarily what you're working on right now, or pharmaceuticals. And it's sort of in your DNA to be interested in all of these things. And again, in the speculative fiction, dystopia is really charming somehow. So do you find optimism, and do you weave that kind of optimism into your thinking about writing scripts and making these visionary pieces?
Yeah, I do. I think we have such an opportunity as to be part of the science communication sphere, and that people take what they see on screen as a representation, a faithful representation of how life works. Even if it's in speculative fiction, these are how people behave in this area. And I think that I carry hope in exactly what Dr. Alter was describing, which is we can impact the way people lead their lives. It is, yes, we tell a lot of stories in extremis. We always, we tend towards the stories of when things go wrong, but we also have an opportunity to normalize changes in behavior. So exactly as you're describing, not even calling attention to it, but just normalizing people living different lifestyles with less consumption, or, not even calling attention to it, but a person that you're watching, the hero in your show, has a different kind of diet. It's not filled with animal products. And so instead of lecturing people and saying, this is information you need to take in and understand, marry it with emotion and story. And the hope that I always carry with me is being able to expand people's perspective about how they can be living and how they can change their lives, and just where they're not going to normally be accessing this information or these kinds of thoughts in other places, that you can kind of weave it into entertainment and create change in those places as well.
You talk about this expanded perspective, and Leland, you have probably had the most exceptional perspective offered that any of us can imagine. You've described being up in space in the ISS as an orbital outpost looking back at humanity. Right. And I'd love to hear your reflections on that. But I've also heard you describe the overview effect, looking at the Earth.
Right. I mean, I'm just blown away about this conversation and the intersectionality of the arts, rich storytelling to solve problems. And that's what, Dr. Alter, Scott, and Kath, and Jana, I mean, the science communication being effective in helping someone see how that working together as a team can solve problems. I mean, I was a skinny kid from a southern racist town who saw the moon landing and said, I can't do that, and ended up losing my hearing in a training accident. And the doctors told me I would never fly. And I flew twice. And if I can do that, we can do anything. And this perspective that we look back at the planet as we go around it, like I said, every 90 minutes, we're doing this with people we used to fight against. So if we can do that, we can solve all the problems. And this one strange rock that we have that, the National Geographic show called One Strange Rock, it demonstrated how we live and survive and thrive on this planet that right now is the only one that we know has habitable life. I mean, we're looking at exoplanets and we're looking out there, we're exploring, but is this our only one strange rock in our solar system? Well, it is the only one in our solar system. But how do we keep it? How do we contain it? How do we live and work together with the animal community, with tribes and cultures and people to thrive and survive? And it's this rich intersection between the storytelling and the science and the truth is what really gives us a perspective that we can have hope and believe in a beautiful and wonderful future.
So that's a perfect lead in to show the clip of One Strange Rock, which features all the living astronauts who have left the planet. And you host one of the episodes, don't you, Leland?
Yeah, Awakening was when my brain was rewiring itself to hear again after I lost my hearing in this training accident. So check it out.
This is the trailer, really, for One Strange Rock.
I'm going to tell you about the most incredible place. And you know what? You're walking on it. Our planet is literally bursting with life.
There's so much activity, and our planet is right in the middle of it.
I really wish that everyone could see the world the way that I've had a chance to see it.
The strangest place in the whole universe might just be right here.
One Strange Rock, March 26th on National Geographic.
I do love that we've kind of taken this journey from space, right, into the microscopic terror plaguing humanity at the moment, and back from space, this kind of requirement to look back down on Earth. Leland, before we close, since we open with you, I really appreciate when you describe these hardships that you had to overcome and your perseverance, and you do that a lot. You're very interested in making sure we have a whole spectrum of voices and contributors both to science and art and culture. And in this difficult time, if you could maybe just tell us how you're finding the grace to proceed yourself.
Well, my mother's name is Grace, so I've always tried to live a life with grace, but I'm cooking more, I'm walking my dogs more, I'm trying to reach out to people to tell them that we can get through this collectively as one team. And I think, there was a line in that One Strange Rock that said, we're all on this together. And once we get out of our myopic view of just our circumstances, that we can come together and solve these incredible problems and do it with grace and dignity and hope and empathy, and with these rich stories that Scott and Cap and Dr. Alter are sharing with the universe. So that's what I have a belief that it's going to be okay.
This was such a wonderful conversation. I wish we had another hour where we could just interrupt each other at will. It's a lot harder when we're in this virtual boxes, in our separate boxes, but this felt to me like a very beautiful, intimate conversation. I thought it was fascinating. I want to thank you all so much. And for coming together as we promised we would, to speak with such optimism in these times. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jana.
Thank you.